Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Connect Africa, to our daily session with Kwame Gonza. For today, we are going to look at the report that just came out from IMF, in which IMF has projected the African economy grows by downward. Actually, it's grows, but it's downward by 0.1%. And the reason, according to this article, is that, which we're going to share in a while, because of Nigeria's it grows is down by 0.2%. So this is their projection for 2025, and it's down from what they have projected in for 2024. So that was done last year in April 2023. In any case, Kwame will dive us into it. Welcome, Kwame.
Thank you so much, Mahlet. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, very clear, loud
Oh,
also.
thank you. Thank you so much. Greetings to everyone who's watching us. And we want to thank everyone who's watching the channel and thank you for joining us on this journey of consciousness and understanding. So we are glad that you've decided to support the channel. Every day we are here, and the purpose for us to be here is to put out the African narrative, to put out what Africa should be saying, Africa's voice. What should Africa be saying about different issues across the globe? And of course, even those issues which are happening across our continent, this different narrative that has been painted out there on behalf of Africa. Like when we talk about the economy, which we are going to discuss today, Africa's economy, what is the status of the African economy? Of course, the IMF has come out to give its narrative on the African economy. So we coming also to comment on that, to give you the reasons why Africa is where it is economically, vis-a-vis what the IMF is saying and where we need to go, of course, as an economy. Because for a very long time, these things are not spoken about, but we will try to give you a broader picture of all the African economy. And this is not normally done in most of the mainstream media platforms. But that is what we are going to do, what we are going to do. So we want to thank you for being part of the channel. And back to you, Mahlet.
All right, thank you, Kwame. So this was the article that came out, from IMF. Welcome, to the first two audience here, Mohammed and Patricia. Welcome. So that's your bonus for being here first, earlier than anyone, but I'm sure others also. It's just because they didn't comment. Anyway, this is the article. Yeah, as you can see, this is a projection for 2025. So they have 3 years in consecutive. This is like the globally. They have the global economy here for 2023, 2024, and 2025. And we have here advanced economy 2023, 24, and 25. And we are here emerging market and developing economies where Africa is. This is again last year, this year, and then for the coming year. So in this article, the IMF has revised sub-Saharan Africa's economy grows downward by 0.1%, which is to 3.7% in 2024. So according to its latest economic outlook, which is released July 16, 2024. So the IMF also said mainly as a result of a 0.1 percentage point downward revision to the growth outlook in Nigeria amid weaker than expected activity in the first quarter of this year. So this is although we say Africa, but as I call it, it's a sub-Saharan Africa, sub of what you tell me. But Kwame, so first, I think it's better if you can comment, on the general IMF economic outlook. How does it work? It's good to have that basic background. So yeah, we can understand it.
Thank you, Mahlet. Thank you very much. So, what is happening is that the IMF comes up with the figures, once in a while, to project the growth of various economies across the world, and of course, various regions. But what we are seeing right now today is that they are saying that Africa's economy is going to grow by 3.5%. All right, 3.5% from what they had projected in April, that the continent will grow at 3.8%. Now, of course, they gave the reason that it is because Nigeria is going to slow down, because Nigeria is a major economy. And if you remember, uh, uh, Nigeria has been the biggest economy for almost, I think, close to 5 years, close or more than 5 years on the African continent. But they followed the IMF advice. President Tinubu of Nigeria followed the IMF advice and devalued the Nigerian currency, and this made their GDP, to drop to the fourth position on the continent, below South Africa, Egypt, and I think which country else? It could be Algeria, some of the biggest economies. So it went to number four. Yes. So this, of course, in one way or the other, reflects what is happening on the continent, and some of the things actually which we have been saying, that we need to pay attention to what is happening across the African continent, because look, just a dysfunctionality in Nigeria is affecting the whole continent. Now, the general growth of the continent, that is what they are put at 3.7%. Now, so what they mean by 3.7%, just to give it to those who don't understand it, is they look at the GDP, the whole GDP of the continent, all right, and how much are you increasing that particular year. Okay, so if they say 3% or 3.7%, it means they are looking at our GDP, which is around 3.4, $3.5 trillion. All right, so we are just growing at 3.7% of that GDP. All right, which we have as a continent, as a combined GDP of the continent. But this devaluation, which happened in Nigeria in itself, people like Dangote were against it actually, and he came out and mentioned it, that this devaluing of the currency, is uncalled for. Because look, you devalue the currency and then you are pumping up the interest rates, so you are making life extremely very difficult for the people. And with this devaluation and hiking up of the interest rates, almost up to 30%, we did not print money, that we printed a lot of money and gave it to the people. Like how, COVID relief in the United States, they gave out checks, free checks. They printed and gave out free checks. So now what we are seeing here is that we are devaluing our currency and hiking up the interest rates. So we are absorbing what we are doing is that we are absorbing the US's inflation. So the printing which happened in the United States now is exported. So they are exporting that inflation. That's why you are seeing that everywhere where the IMF is going on the African continent is encouraging countries to devalue their currency, because they want us to absorb, that inflation, and it is our people who suffer. And then, of course, they advise our people also to hike up the interest rate. So then you cannot build the business as if the interest rates are are high up in the roof. So this is the the challenge that we are facing as a continent now. So this shows you again also that at the major economies, which are bigger on the continent, the biggest economies on the continent, if they are not doing well, then definitely the whole continent is not going to do well. All right. Look at a country like South Africa, for example, which they are saying is going to grow, it's been growing at zero point 0.6, and they are projecting that it will grow, I think, by next year by 0.9%. It's very bad. It's very difficult because look, South Africa absorbs a lot of some of our people who go there to work, of course, regardless of the problems which are there. But it is a major economy, so it needs to grow. But if it is growing at just 0.6%, not even 1%, it means that we have real problems on the African continent. These are real problems. There's going to be a lot of pressure on the available resources, and yet the population is growing. All right, so it's just growing below the population increase. And of course that is even in Africa, the whole continent. When you look at the 3.7%, you can see that this is almost equal to the population growth on the African continent, which is around 3%. All right, which is difficult. That now it's almost like you are not growing. If you are growing almost equal to your population, it means that you are not growing. People's lives are not improving. All right, and yet we have seen in the past that there has been some growth in the past. All right, for the last 10 years, starting 2020, the African economies had been relatively, has been relatively, growing well, right, for since 2020, and of course for certain reasons. So that is what I can say about this, report, and it doesn't look good, of course, and it means that we have to do certain things now differently as Africans. We have to wake up. It means we have to wake up. There's something wrong with our economies.
Okay. Thank you, Kwame, for that. Now, can you analyze this growth according to IMF regionally? Maybe first as we start like globally, and then those advanced economies, I see they have very low number, like 1.6, 1.7 it is. And then the emerging economies, whereas they have like all above 4. For me, with my very limited uh, understanding of this, I would say, like, why is the number of the advanced economies is not higher than the emerging one, the developing countries? And yeah, how it work in Africa, or also regionally, is this different? The West from the East, from the South?
Yeah. So for the regional, so what is interesting is that if you look at countries regionally on the continent, you can see that countries in the east, in the eastern part of the continent, are growing relatively higher. Their growth is relatively higher than the western part,
Why?
and that is simply because when you look at these economies, those ones which are relatively independent, of course, I'm not saying wholly independent, but countries which have a relative independence when it comes to economics, their economies, they are doing quite well. If you go to the east, for example, you can pick out countries like Ethiopia, which are projected to grow at 7. Even before COVID, Ethiopia was growing very well. It was almost, hitting 10%. It was the fastest growing economy. When you go to Uganda, is projected to grow by 6%. All right, at least internally they are projecting it to grow by 6%, which is above, the average of the continent, which they are projecting way above the average of the continent, which they are projecting at 3.7%. When you go to Rwanda, they are projecting there to grow at, say, 5%. But what is characteristic, even Tanzania also is projected to grow, relatively well. So what is characteristic about these economies is that they have a relative amount of independence. If you go to Rwanda, you can see there's a president who is very independent minded, that they do their own thing. Now, when you go to Uganda, also there has been, a pushback by the president over there against the IMF. So this is different from being, a Pan-Africanist. I think I remember we differentiated, that yesterday here. Someone being resistant to imperialism is quite different from being a Pan-Africanist. Now, when we go to Ethiopia, also we can see that the growth there is relatively, good compared to the average, is way above the average. Now, when you come to the south, all right, when you come to the south, you look at South Africa, 0.6%. This is very small. And when you look at the structure of the South African economy itself, it is very much embedded with the neo-colonial system. All right.
Mhm.
So all the bad things that happen in the metropolis, they happen in South Africa. They will be absorbed enough. They will be pushed towards, South Africa. Why? Because the industries, they're just some sort of leftovers. They are just leftover industries from the West. They are not really like industries which have been built, to support themselves, maybe to compete on a global stage. All right. They are
Mhm.
just leftover industries which are being pushed like in South Africa. So those industries are attached to the Western economy. All right. So for South Africa to get away where it is, it needs policies like what the EFF has proposed. The economic freedom fighters, EFF, which has proposed that the South African economy, and of course, which we have also proposed in the past, that the South African economy has to be integrated into the rest of the continent. All right. Those industries, it has to industrialize in a way that it has to be integrated in the other parts of the continent. Of course, it has some industries, relative industries, but it is also importing a lot. As a country, it is importing a lot. So for it to get from where it is, it has to integrate its industries in the rest of the continent, and not just as a parasite for it to just feed in onto the continent, but it has to industrialize, but also take some of the goods from the rest of the continent. And we have to build, generally what it means, that we have to build the continent together. That is what it means. And South Africa is not growing as desired, all right, because it looks sort of like where it reached, it cannot get away from there anymore until something structural is done, something revolutionary, is done, for it to move from there. And for other reasons, which I said, which is the major reason that the structure of the economy is linked. The whites who own the economy in South Africa, they are linked to the Western world, that the money is moving back and forth from the West, from the Western world to these economies. So whenever they are not happy, they take out the money and they send it to the West. All right. So that is how the economic structure is. Now, this is different from countries like Zimbabwe, where there is some relative, also there is some relative, independence, when it comes to economics. All right, that the IMF has not been, on them very much. You can see that Zimbabwe in 2022, it grew by 6%. I think 2023 by 5%. All right. So you can see that even if this year is going to slow down to 3%, but it has been also in a good position. Now, when you go to the western part of the continent, where the IMF has really engulfed the place, all right, almost had taken over the place, is the one who's advising in everything. Look at countries like Ghana, economy is slowed down completely slowed down, to almost less than 3%. Okay, 3.2%. At one time, it slowed down completely, almost to around the 2 point something percent. And you go to Nigeria, which of course they are talking about also, it has slowed down Nigeria also. These figures, like Nigeria is growing, also are not sustainable. They are really not sustainable, at all. You go to Sierra Leone and all these small countries, those ones, even you don't need to talk about them. So all spaces where the IMF has come back to take over, the growth has slowed, and simply because we are losing that independence which we have had for the last 10 years, for example, starting 2020, that you were hearing a lot that there was this thing called Africa Rising. And the narrative was that African leaders are turning towards China. African leaders are turning towards China for lending. All right. So, and that is simply because China's lending, uh, you know, uh, China's money did not come with a lot of, how do I call it, conditions. All right. The conditions, the terms and condition on its lending, on its money were very low. All right. And they are favorable. The terms with which China lends to Africa and other countries, they are more favorable. So, and we sold, so China was also growing rapidly. So this enabled us to sell a lot of commodities for those countries which have a lot of commodities. By the commodities, we mean the minerals, all right, the mineral resources. So China was buying a lot of those mineral resources. So it enabled us, and at a fair price. Unlike when you talk about the United States and Europe, when they were at the peak of their growth, they were taking our minerals for free. So there was no growth in Africa almost completely. All right. So they take all the minerals, what they want, they just take it for free without almost free without paying for it. They don't pay for it. They just find tactics with their institutions like the IMF of taking it without paying for it. So there was no growth. Now, over these years, when China's economy has slowed down to 5% from 10%, 8%, where it was growing, and it needed a lot of minerals. Uh, and then, of course, the demonizing of China by the US, as they have been saying that it is indebting, is overburdening Africa with debt, which we saw here that it is not true, because most of the debt in Africa is owned by the West by 77%, and China owns only 13%. But also that has made China, become a little bit skeptical and pull back a little bit when it comes to lending. All right. So this leaves a gap whereby the IMF has come back aggressively since 2020. So after COVID, especially during that period, the United States printed a lot of money, and when it printed a lot of that money, it did not have where to take it, so it has to push this money outside. Now they gave it to the IMF. The IMF started giving it out into the African continent. Now these are the debt traps the IMF is setting. So during the COVID period, they pumped out a lot of money, and that money was not accounted for actually. And that money, when it was not accounted for, then they came back and then they are lending more. So one can say that the IMF is encouraging actually corruption in our countries, because these people in these governments in Africa, they did not account for the COVID money, which was borrowed, which was given by the IMF, and they borrowed it actually, but they came back. Now they are lending more, and they are lending with serious, conditions which are affecting the people, as you are seeing what is happening in Kenya, that they wanted to lend them about 3.2, I think, billion, and they are requiring them to raise about $2.7 billion every year. So the people are resisting. Now the people are resisting these draconian conditions. So the western part of the continent, especially where almost there's no independence and the IMF has taken over, the growth is extremely slow. It has slowed to 3% or less than 3.5%. And this kind of growth is not really sustainable, because our economists like Dambisa Moyo tells us that if you want to double your economy, all right, in less than 10 years, or in a decade, you want to double the economy in a decade, you need to grow at 7 to 10%. All right, within 10 years, you want to double the size of your economy, you need to grow at 7 to 10%. All right, so this helps you to improve the lives of the people. Now, if you cannot grow at this, especially for our economies, which are just growing. They are not developed economies like the United States. You can talk of the United States. We need really to grow, because our countries are still poor, and majority of our people are still down, really down, suffering. All right. So we cannot afford to grow below 7%. So the growing below 7%, it means that we are not doing much. We are not progressing really. So this is what it means. But those are the noticeable, growth patterns when we look at the continent, that in areas where we see that there's independence, and independence in thought and in policy by the Africans themselves, you can see that there is, growth. There will be growth. But when the IMF comes in and interrupts and then starts giving ideas, then the growth slows down. All right, when it starts interfering in an economy, you see that the growth slows down. Or if you get within itself, the African economies, if you get people who have mindsets of the IMF, and majorly they are running on IMF policies, or those ones who are trained, because you see that some of our economic ministers or whatever, finance ministers. Some of them you see, or even the presidents, they may come to power and they were trained by the IMF. Some of them actually have worked in the IMF and the World Bank. So these are some of the people who come and take over the economies. So you see that things, slow down. There's no independence. They will just be reading sort of like from the book, and they want to implement it and impose it on the people. Some things which are really not realistic. So they will take theory and they want to impose it on the people. And that is when we get problems. So an example is Ghana, that there's a vice president there who is the chairperson of the economic management team. When he was in opposition, he was talking a lot and talking about economy and talking about this. He was pumping out a lot of theoretical things. But when he came to power, then he messed up, the whole economy. Up to now, he has messed up the economy. So this is the problem that we have with everywhere where the International Monetary Fund has interfered, or its thinking has interfered. You see that the economy slows down, and there's no experiment. People, they don't do experiments there, but they implement things by the book. All right. So our economy, as the African, continent, is not at the same growth level, and actually we are underproducing. Our production is very low. Production capacity is very low, that we cannot afford to grow at 3.5%, 3 points, which they are giving us, the IMF is saying. And of course, that is what it is. So we need to grow faster than that to make a difference in the lives of our people.
So why is Africa's economy is growing downward to 3.6% or 3.5%?
Yeah, so I think it's because we are not doing the right things. So there's that interruption which I spoke about, but we need to do the right things. We have not looked at unlocking the potential of the continent. All right, we are not investing in the right things. You go to South Africa, you have seen that in the past, years, there has been uh, load shedding in the
Mhm.
country. All right. So when you are talking about building an economy, you have to solve first the first three things which you have to solve, which are structural and fundamental to the functioning of an economy, is energy. That's just basic, because if you don't have energy, which is in the form of electricity, and of course fuel, which is going to run the system, the whole economy, vehicles, trains, and all this. If you have no energy, you can't do anything. All right, you cannot run anything. You cannot have fridges running. All right, you cannot run computers. You cannot have communication systems. So energy, basically, that is number one. Now, if you cannot solve that, you are in big problems. Africa has not solved that. You go to countries like Sierra Leone, the energy, half of the time, the energy is not there. There's no energy. All right, there's no electricity. The installing capacity, if you look at it, you go to Nigeria, even I don't even need to go to Sierra Leone. Africa's biggest economy, Nigeria, has never had a stable source of energy, stable source of power, and yet it is the biggest producer of oil on the continent, or biggest producer of crude oil. So this is a huge problem, that the basic fundamentals have not been solved. Right, energy. Number two, transport. We need to build a railway system across the African continent. Now, some of these economies, like we said, South Africa, they have sort of kept off. They have reached the ceiling of where they can go, of how far they can grow independently without being part of the African continent. All right. Looking at where they are, looking at the situation where they are located, on a landmass. Of course, other people will start talking about Singapore, why Singapore is growing and stuff, is able to grow like that and stuff like that, or other small countries. But looking at the location where it is located, that it is located close to other poor countries on the continent, it has sort of reached the ceiling. Now, to break that ceiling, it has to be integrated into the rest of the continent. Now, that's what we are saying, that uh, apart from solving the energy, then you need an integrated transport system on the African continent. Number two, that's the integrated transport system. And number three, then we need an integrated communication system. All right. So these, they will help to to unleash the potential of the continent. Now you can build industries, all right, because you have an integrated transport system and then you have a source of energy. So we need to develop the energies, our energy, and develop it to full capacity so that at least 80% of our people have access to energy. But you see that almost 50%, almost 60% of our people don't have access to energy on the continent, which is very difficult. Now, how can you grow an economy if people don't have access to energy and they don't have access to transportation to transport their goods? So these are some of the the problems. But that interference, apart from having these problems, that interference also is a big problem that the IMF has come back to the continent in a huge way. This is going to retard the continent, and there's no independent thought. People don't have independent action toward economic policies. So is going to slow us down. And of course, the United States and other countries, like European countries, they are desperate. All right, they are desperate. So they are looking for where to extract the resources, and they are extracting of resources not only in the raw materials, but extracting also of our economies. It is called harvesting of economies. And that is what the United States right now and European countries are trying to achieve. And they achieve it using their tools such as the IMF and World Bank, because these ones they lend in a predatory manner, and then we have to pay back. All right, we have to pay back those huge interest rates plus the principal amount. So they are kind of harvesting what we have been growing for the last 10 years, which have been as a result, which growth has happened as a result of our engagement with China and the East. So this one now requires us to have some sort of strategic fight back when it comes to this, that we have to implement we have to do some strategic moves ourselves on the continent by investing in continental infrastructure so that we can unleash much more growth compared to individual countries, and of course, which can easily be subjugated by the West.
Thank you very much, Kwame. So that brings us to the last session, as we always do here. So for Africa, what is the best thing to come out of this and make the growth like a jump and be like around 7%, where you said that is what we need?
So I think that it's going to be difficult, especially when the African economy is not integrated as when it's not integrated and is being governed by one government. Is going to be difficult. But what we need, I think, we need to invest in infrastructure a lot. This a system where we have our infrastructure is being built by foreigners, I mean, is a big mistake and is very wrong that a lot of African governments are doing this. The basic infrastructure in China, you never saw that they invite, whether it is Americans or Europeans, that they should build it for them. All right. When you talk of rail, so when we want to build a rail system in our countries, we invite the Chinese. You see, so this one you are losing jobs. All right. This is loss of jobs. The basic infrastructure, energy systems, transport systems, roads, all these are jobs, buildings. So all the infrastructure, we have to invest in all the infrastructure. If we are talking about building, like if we build like a dam, like Inga Dam, we should involve our own people. They should be the ones to build it, because these are jobs and is growth. You are stimulating growth because you are putting money in the pockets of your people. So and then you build a rail. If you build the railways and other industries, your people should be in. Do not invite the Chinese. Do not invite the Americans. Do not invite the Brazilian. Do not invite the airports. All these, we should invest in them, but we have to use our own labor. We should use our own labor. So this is creating jobs, and this is the functional economy. So the basic infrastructure, like roads, railways, and other systems, that energy systems like dams, okay, should be built by our own labor. We should use our own labor to build those infrastructure. So that is, number one. Now, we need to grow in an organized manner, and that is why we are calling for a united Africa as a people, because the era of growing in a disorganized manner is over. There's no reason why we should grow in a chaotic manner as Africa. All right. Europe, countries like the United States grew in a chaotic manner. The blueprint now is there. There's countries which have built themselves from the ground up. You look at China, all right. You look at whatever we talk about Singapore, but I think the best example for us is China. These people, they have sort of produced a blueprint which we can copy and adopt to our environment, and be able to build an economy for ourselves. But our heads of state, they still want to copy what is happening in the West, and they still want the West to impose on them, and they follow. Like, you see what we've spoken about Tinubu, that he, instead of moving independently, decided to devalue the naira because the West is stealing him, and then remove subsidies, and then all kind of painful things which are just punishing the people. So it is almost like he came there to punish the people. You see, instead of making the people's lives better, he is there to make the people's lives miserable. That's almost what he has come to do. So, but there's no reason why we should grow in that kind of chaotic manner, as if everyone going in different direction, right? The United States grew in this manner, and the other European countries like Britain. So the United States, when it was growing, a lot of people died. Depression, during the depression of 1929, because it was chaotic. There was no sort of knowing who should lead the growth. The growth was not organized. All right. So it is almost like the United States grew out of a chance. It grew by chance. You see, and it was built on a lot of suffering of the people. All right, because it was testing here, testing there. The country came and it was formed, and then it started growing, but it grew by almost by chance. All right. It is later on. That is why they say, oh, entrepreneurship, private sector, they go up about and do all these things. But of course, at first, it was the state which was involved in giving out land, giving out free labor, which was African labor, and all these things, and inviting people and giving them land. But it almost later on there grew in a very disorganized manner. There's no reason why we should copy this kind of thing. We don't want to grow in a very disorganized manner like that. When we have a blueprint that other people, we are late to the game, and we have other people who have grown, who have come after, who have come before us. So we can just take that blueprint and implement, like what we are talking about. Let us, invest, take our resources and invest in the key sectors which will bring the growth of other sectors, the basic sectors like energy, transportation, and communication. All right. But you can see that even in this 21st century, African countries are still struggling. All of them are still struggling, including South Africa, the biggest economy on the continent, the most advanced economy, still struggling with electricity. You see, so this is a huge shame. Nigeria alone, if it functioned with its four refineries and produced to full capacity with Dangote refinery added, it should be able to solve Africa's energy problems. All right. But we are still operating as if, we are confused, as if we don't know what to do, as if everything should build itself by chance. So I think that these are the problems which we have to rectify. But to do it without unifying the continent into a single government, I think it will be very, very difficult. We will not be able to achieve it.
Thank you very much, Kwame, again for that brilliant explanation, giving us a background, explaining really what it means when they say it's downward, when they project downward, and then what Africa needs, to come out of this and go back where it was like 2021, 2022. It was good, like most of them have the one you said close to 7% growth. Thank you, all of you who have been, who are here tuning and dedicating your time, trusting us, and for engaging, for commenting, for asking, for suggesting everything, every little thing that you are doing, from your time. We appreciate it. We don't take it for granted. Please share the video with others. And I'm trying, I don't think I have seen a question, but a quick shout out. It's like a ritual for us. We cannot leave the room without a child of God, Agro Valley Farm, Yoruba land. Sia Academy. We have Patricia Cox and Muhammad Musa Ali, and those who did not mention here, also all of you. Thank you, Kwame, once again. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that so far, and hit that notification bell so that you will be notified for upcoming videos. If you find it informative and relevant, this information, go ahead and give it a like. Share the video with others. To support us, you can click to our link of PayPal accounts, which is in the description section. And we thank you in advance. Thanks again. Thank you, Kwame. And say bye-bye from us. Ciao.